But I came back with some interactive games and activities. So I hope you're ready this morning to participate, because we only win together this morning if everyone plays their role and plays their part. And so we're talking about passing the baton of faith. Amazon was so good and delivered in the snowstorm some batons. And so this is a legit track and field baton. We're going to start this baton all the way in the top left corner. My man over there, you are the lucky number one. You are going to start the baton. You're going to pass the baton to your left, down the back row, the whole way. Now, see, you're going to have a little gap right there, right? So you're going to have to stand up, move over there, come down to the next row, and pass it to that guy right there. And he's going to pass it to the right all the way down that row, and then you're going to bring it to the next row. We're going to snake it back and forth all the way from the top, all the way so it gets back to me, okay? So you got to work together, and you got to pass the baton, all right? Here we go. All right, come on. I believe in us. I believe we can do this. I believe we can do this. You know, there is only one key, as you're all completely distracted. I'm just going to keep going, okay? There's only one key to this. You got to pass the baton successfully, right? You can hold the baton, you can wave the baton in the air, you can dance with the baton. It don't matter. There's only one thing that will help you to achieve this task, and that is to simply pass the baton. The same is true with a relay race on a track and field sporting event. You could have 4 of the fastest people on the planet on a team, and they each run their leg the fastest. But if they do not successfully pass the baton in the little window, they lose. It's happened time and time again in the Olympics or any other track and field meet, right? The only key to this is passing the baton. And the same is true with your life and with our church. The same is true with your family, or maybe your business or organization. Like, you got to pass the baton. Like, your family's got some traditions, right? You got some things that you do that are meaningful to you, right? They're valuable to you. Don't mess up the snake now, man. You've got stuff that's valuable, meaningful to you. But if you're the only family that ever does it, is it really all that important? Look at that. Give yourself a hand. Whoa. Right? There's certain things that if you don't pass them on to your kids, they're going to die out. You think it's so important. It's so great. This is my family. If you're a part of my family, this is the way that we are. Oh, yeah? Well, we'll see what that is true or not if you've passed it on successfully to your family, to your kids that are coming after you. How about your business or your organization that you run? There's something unique, something special about it. It's got certain values that make it unique. Like, you're really making a difference in the world. But is it just going to end with you? Isn't it more important that it continues on beyond just your life or beyond your leadership, beyond your influence? The baton pass is everything. And the same is true with church. The same is true about the things of God. The baton pass is so important. And we can think about it in church in 2 different ways, I think. Number one, we could think of it as we're passing the baton to the next generation of people that are coming to be a part of what God is doing here at Connect Us Church. Like, there's new people. Every single Sunday is somebody's first time here. And if that's you today, like, we're so glad that you're here. We so recognize that you're here. We know it's a big deal that you showed up to church for the first time today. And every single week, there's somebody just like you who's here for the first time. And we want to say, hey, welcome. We started this for you 3 years ago. Next week, we're going to celebrate our 3rd anniversary. And some of you remember, like 4.5 years ago, when we got together in some diner in the middle of nowhere and said, hey, I think God had put on a dream in my heart that we're going to start a church. You want to be a part of it? And they look at you like, what? Here we are, 4.5 years later. It's pretty awesome. Some of you remember being in the community center when we launched like our first kind of public, semi-public meeting, January 2020. And you were there on that night. And you were like, what is this going to be about? Are we really going to start a church? How's this going to work? And here we are, 4 years later. You met in my house for 6 months. And some of you are like, man, I miss those days. And you know what? We're going to celebrate this a little bit more next week. But man, if you were there at those early stages and you're still here today, we just love you so much. Your faithfulness is inspiring. Your faith is crazy. Like, to be a part of a church that doesn't even meet weekly on Sundays for service, who does that? You did. That's amazing. But then you're like, wow, this is my first Sunday. I've been coming for a couple of weeks, and like Pastor Dustin's like the newest person here. And he's like, am I welcome? Like, can I fit into this thing that's been happening? And the answer is, of course, yes. Like, there's not a special group of people that have been around for so long and like it's impossible to get in. That's not happening here. Because that small group of people that started this church had you on their mind. They had you in their prayers from the day one. And says, we're starting a brand new church, willing and able to connect with anybody in our community that God's working in their life. And here you are today as a result of that. And so there's always that next person, that next generation of person that we are connecting with, that we are reaching out to, that we are welcoming into the family of God here at Connect This Church. But there's also then another way to think about the importance of passing on the baton of faith to the next generation, and that's with our kids. Like, our ministry to our kids here at this church is so important, and I will argue it's probably like one of the, if not the most important things that any church can do, is to have an excellent ministry to our kids, because the kids are the church. The kids are not like the next generation coming up. They are the church today. But one day, they're going to be up here. They're going to be in charge. They're going to be growing up. And like, our ministry to our babies, to our preschoolers and our toddlers and our elementary students and our preteens, and some of you were talking about young adult ministry or talking about teenagers. And, you know, we don't have a specific ministry to our teenagers right now, but I wish we would. And so maybe God's calling you to say, hey, we need to start that, because you know what? There's so many teenagers in our community, in our lives, that need Jesus. They need good friends that's going to point them to do things that honor the Lord. And so that is so important. We're passing the baton of faith, because you know what? It's so great that like you have a great faith experience, that you are growing in your faith. Maybe you came to faith in Jesus recently. Maybe you've been growing in your faith. You've been getting connected in friendship and discovering your gifts and abilities. You've been serving. You've been making a difference in people's lives. But you know what? That's great, but you got to pass that on to somebody else. You got to bring someone else along with you through everything. Like, you have to. This is such a big part of what we're trying to do, because it's a big part of what God has done. We talk about here, our heartbeat of a church is that we pray, we care, and we share. And it's great if you pray, it's great if you care, and it's great if you share Jesus, but you got to help somebody else do that too. It's not done until you've helped somebody pray for somebody else, that you've helped somebody care for somebody else, that you've helped somebody share Jesus with somebody else. We're passing the baton of faith. God talks about this a lot in Scripture, like when he's given the law to Moses and all the amazing things that God did through Moses. He told Moses, do this every single year, or ever so often, so that, and the reason is that your kids would ask you, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? And remember, a couple weeks ago we talked about the Passover meal. This is one of those things Do this so your kids ask you, why are you doing this? So you can pass on the baton of faith to your kids for every generation, for all time. Just pass it on, pass it on, pass it on. And Jesus also was super intentional with this. Jesus said before he ascended into heaven, he gave his followers kind of one final command, one thing that just summarized everything that Jesus wanted his people to do. And he said to make disciples, right? A disciple maker, somebody who makes disciples, means that you are passing the teachings of Jesus, passing being a disciple on to the next person. Like it can't end with you. This is a self-propagating command. A disciple is somebody who makes disciples. It's somebody who passes the baton of faith on to the next generation. And so it's so clear, and it's such a good challenge. But every time I preach a message like this, I feel like it's like, yeah, that sounds good, but I don't know. And so today, I hope is a tangible way to just hone in on the fact that this is so important to us, it's so important to God, and it's going to be a little scary. There's a big warning for people that do not pass the baton of faith on. It's a big warning, and we find this in Judges chapter 2. I don't think you woke up this morning and say, I'm going to church and I'm going to hear a sermon from Judges. You're like, I don't even know where that is in my Bible. It's in the Old Testament. It's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges. So if you have your Bible, you can turn there. If you don't have a Bible, we'd love to send you home with a free Bible today. Just grab one in the New Here area before you leave. You can also scan that QR code over there and see everything that I'm going to say before I say it. And then you can also follow along with the scriptures. So Judges chapter 2, starting in verse 6, it says, after Joshua sent the people away, each of the tribes left to take possession of the land allotted to them. And the Israelites served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and the leaders who outlived him, and those who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. They buried him in the land he had been allocated at Timnath-Serah in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gash. And after that generation died, another generation grew up who did not acknowledge the Lord or remember the mighty things he had done for Israel. Now, that's a sad verse. That's a sad verse. And I just want to tell you, we're going to live in this like harsh reality for a little while, but we're going to end the sermon on a positive note with Abraham, okay? Because he did this successfully. Joshua, he didn't. Which is surprising to me, okay? It's super surprising because of what God did in Joshua's life. The things that Joshua experienced, the things that Joshua literally got to live through, and Joshua didn't pass. I mean, he tried so hard, and it didn't work. But like, just think. So we don't know for sure, but Joshua most likely grew up in Egypt. He was probably a little kid. And they were slaves in Egypt, his people, his family, his parents, his brothers and sisters. And then God called a guy named Moses and said, you go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. And Moses said, I guess, I'll try. And God did all these plagues, and there was that 10th plague where the firstborn son was killed unless the Passover happened, right? Unless the animal was sacrificed and the blood was sprinkled on the doorposts. And so Joshua was probably inside one of those houses where the death angel came and literally passed over the door. And Joshua is sitting there, and he says, oh, okay, well, we're good. God saved me. God spared me. And Pharaoh said, okay, fine, take your people and leave. And so Moses is taking the people, and he's leading the huge nation out of Egypt, and they get to the sea. And the Pharaoh's army is changed their mind, is coming after him. And Moses lifts his staff out of the water, and Joshua this little kid, this little boy, walks through the sea on dry ground. Can you imagine doing that? You were slaves. Your family had been slaves in this place for 400 years, and now there's a miracle, and you walk through the sea. You walk literally through what God does in your life, this miraculous thing in your life. You experience it firsthand. And so when I'm talking about these things of Joshua, I want you to think of your own life, of how God rescued you from some sort of slavery or addiction or some sort of bondage that you were strapped into, held onto, that He freed you from and led you out into this new freedom. He's done that for me, maybe for you as well. He did that for Joshua. And so they get through the Red Sea, and now they're heading towards the Promised Land, and they come across their first battle, the Amalekites. And guess who Moses picks to be the leader of the army? Joshua. And he says, okay, little guy, he's probably a teenager or a young adult now, and he's like, you be in charge of the military. And so he's leading his people out to battle, and the battle is won by Moses holding his hands up in the air. Remember this story in the scriptures? And then there's a guy named Hur and a guy named Aaron that stood under Moses' arms, and when Moses' arms were in the air, Joshua would win the battle. So Joshua literally got to experience victory in his life because God was the one who was making it happen. As they were going through this wilderness, God was providing food for them. I mean, you can't just harvest a crop. It takes a while to do that. They're wandering around. God provided food, this thing called manna, which again in the Hebrew means, what is it? What is it? I don't know. What is it? That's what it is. What is it? And God provided this for them every single day. And of course, they ended up wandering in that wilderness for 40-something years. Joshua, every single day, got to pick up that manna and say, God provided for me today. Every single day, he tangibly got to eat something God provided for him every single day. He also got to drink water from rocks. You ever done that before? Joshua got to do that. He got to eat quail with meat when he got tired of the manna. He got to eat some quail. So Joshua then, he went with Moses up to the mountain, Mount Sinai, to get the law. And so this is an interesting picture. Again, you're just visualizing, you're traveling through Joshua's life here. Moses goes to the top of this mountain, and he brings Joshua with him. So Joshua kind of goes, you can envision it like halfway, and Moses goes up. Everybody else is sitting down around the bottom of the mountain. And they're afraid to go anywhere near the mountain because it's on fire, it's scary. I don't want to go anywhere near that. And guess who's in the middle of that? Joshua. And Joshua is there. And Moses goes a little further. Moses is there for how long? 40 days and nights. Joshua is camping on the middle of this flaming inferno of a mountain because God's presence is so tangible there. Joshua is in the middle of that, staying up there for over a month. And then they come down the mountain, carrying those 10 commandments, and Joshua and Moses are coming together. And then they hear some yelling and screaming coming from the camp below. And Joshua is the one to hear that first. And he says, oh no, there's a battle going on in the camp. There's a war going on. Well, no one could have guessed what was actually happening. It's because they had formed this golden image, this golden calf, and the people were worshiping this golden image instead of the God that they were afraid of that was presenting himself on this mountain. And Joshua was there the whole time, and he saw Moses take these 10 commandments and throw them on the ground, and he can't believe that the law was already broken before it was even delivered to the people. And Joshua was there. In Exodus 33:11, we read that Joshua served Moses. He stayed with Moses in the tent of meeting. In Numbers 11:28, we read that Joshua was a servant of Moses from his youth. And so naturally, when they were at the promised land and they had to go in and they wanted to seek it out, create their battle plan, how was this going to go? Joshua was one of the people to go scope it out. And Joshua comes back and he gives a good report and says, we can go in. Joshua, and who was the other guy's name? Caleb. Joshua and Caleb came and gave a good report, but nobody else did. And so they wandered in that wilderness for 40 years. Joshua had faith in his God. Joshua was with Moses all these times. He was trusted. He knew how to fight a battle with God leading the way. Joshua seen that all happen. And so in Numbers 27, 15 through 23, when a new generation of leadership needed to rise up, when Moses was passing on and passing away, naturally, who was the next leader? Everybody said? Joshua. He was the leader. He was the shepherd, these verses say. He was filled with the Spirit. He had authority, and he was commissioned by God. And so you might wonder, how true is that? Those are good words. Someone could stand over you and pray these words and say, you're going to lead this nation. You're going to continue the mission. Okay. Well, what happens when you get to the Jordan River and you got to cross the river to get to the promised land? And Joshua says, I've been here before. I was standing at the Red Sea as a little boy as Moses stood in the water and said, split. And he walked through on dry land. And so Joshua, he said, well, I guess I'm the new leader. God's chosen me to lead my people. And here we are standing in front of a different river. And so what am I going to do? I'm going to say split. And we're going to walk through on dry ground. Joshua did that. Joshua is moving in what Moses was passing on to him. In fact, this promise from God in Joshua 1:3, I promise you what I promised Moses, wherever you set your foot, you will be on land I have given you. Wherever you go, that land is yours. Joshua's like, okay. Again, how do I know that's true? Because I'm coming up against a huge city, a fortified city called the city of Jericho. It's got huge walls, and there is no way my army is ever going in there. And so Joshua was praying, and God gave Joshua the battle plans. These are weird battle plans. He says, I want you to march around the city one time for 6 days. No fighting? Nope, no fighting. Just march around the city one time a day for 6 days. And then on the seventh day, you march around 6 times. And then on that seventh time, you do it again. And then you yell and blow your horns. And Joshua's like, that's a weird plan. Are you sure, God? But he does it. And Joshua is leading the charge, and they get around the 7th time, and they yell and scream and blow their trumpets, and God causes the walls of Jericho to fall down. And the military that Joshua was leading walks right in and takes over the town as God had promised. Joshua was living in the middle of miraculous things God was doing through him and in his life. Every single moment, every single day, he was with it, seeing it all. Moses had passed this on to him, and now he was walking into it. And so we're covering a lot of space here, but now Joshua is near the end of his life. And he wasn't able to conquer all of the territory that he wanted to. And so he was passing it off to his family, the tribes of Israel. And so Joshua, in faith, was passing on land to his relatives that he hadn't even conquered yet. That's how much faith he had. He said, I believe that you're going to take this over. I'm not going to be able to. I'm too old. But you're going to do it. And he's passing off land he hasn't even conquered yet. He gathers all the leaders together. He tells them the whole story. Everything I just told you, Joshua's telling all the details. From the time he was a little baby being born and being rescued out of Egypt to crossing that Red Sea, fighting those battles, all, being provided for in the wilderness. Joshua's telling the whole story to everybody. And then he says, take the baton. Take the baton. And he says, make me a promise. Like, promise you will follow God. He says, sign the books. He says, build a memorial. He says, do everything you can possibly do to pass the baton, because passing the baton is so important. Joshua even says this in Joshua 24:15. He says, choose this day who you will serve, whether the gods that your fathers served in the region beyond the river or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And the people replied, we would never abandon the Lord and serve other gods. And yet, we already read what happens in the book of Judges, the next sentences after this. They dropped the baton. They didn't know God. Judges chapter 2, Joshua, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. And after that, the generation died. Another generation grew up who did not acknowledge the Lord or remember the mighty things he had done for Israel. How didn't it work? He did everything he possibly could do. It was like my heart breaks for Joshua. He experienced all these miraculous things. He'd been through it all. And even in his last days, he was so intentional of telling the story and having the people make the promise and just spelling it out so clearly. And the people even gave word to him saying, of course we're going to serve the Lord. And yet they didn't. And so what are the implications? What are the results? What are the things that happen because the people chose to not serve the Lord? I want you to hear these, not just to the text of what happened to the people in Joshua's day, but also for your family or for our church, of the things that could happen or the things that will happen if we don't successfully pass the baton of faith to the next generation. And so here in Judges chapter 2, verse 12, we read that they had abandoned the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who had brought them out of Egypt. And they went after other gods, worshiping the gods of the people around them, and they angered the Lord. We did a series last summer about the various gods, the various idols that people worship. And in the scriptures, we read a lot about like the idols of Baal or the idols of Ashtoreth, and you're like, I don't even know what that means today. Yeah, but the things that they stood for, the things that they were worshipped for, are still very much prevalent today. There are so many idols around, false gods around, competing for your worship every single day, every single moment of your life. And if we don't successfully pass the baton of faith to the next generation, there are a host of people ready, willing, and able to pass their baton to your kids, to your friends, to your families. There's a million people on the internet that have large followings on YouTube that will tell you and all the people you want to influence everything they need to know to how to be successful in life. And it'll be all the false idols of the day. Like the latest get-rich scheme, you know? So, hey, you do this and you'll get $1 million tomorrow. And you're like, oh, let me try that. Yeah, okay. See how that goes for you. It's not going to work out. Or you're scrolling through and you see all the beautiful people that live on this planet and all those lustful feelings and lustful ideas of worship that come up in your soul, or, oh man, I'm going to chase after that one. I'm going to go after that one. It's promising me the world, and yet, oh, I don't know. Or what about our society celebrates celebrity like crazy, right? Oh, I wonder what she's doing. I wonder who's he's dating. I wonder what car they're driving or what house they just bought. We're following all these celebrities. How about the idol of family? It's a great thing, but when it becomes the most important thing in the world to you, when you sacrifice everything to give your kids the best life ever, maybe they've moved from a good place to a God place. Or what about, like, I just want to be liked. That's a big idol. I just want to be liked. I want to post something on social media so people see it and people click like, and that makes me feel good. We feel this self-worth idol. We just want to make people like us and please people. These are the idols, some of the idols that creep up if we don't pass the baton of faith to the next generation. Somebody else is going to pass them their baton, and it's going to lead them astray. Not only just astray, the next implication and the next thing is that every time Israel went out to battle, the Lord fought against them, causing them to be, everyone shout that next word that starts with a D, defeated, just as he had warned. The thing about idols is they promise you so much. They say, just do this, just try this, just sacrifice this, just do that, and they deliver nothing. They will always leave you coming back for more, feeling more and more defeated, more and more addicted, more and more depressed, more and more controlled by people that just want to profit off of you. Defeated. Or what about this another implication? And the people were in great distress. I don't think any parent wants to pass on to their kids a life that is worse than the life that they experienced, right? I mean, I'm a parent of 3 kids, and I want my kids to have a better life than me. But yet every single day, parents die on this planet, and they pass on to their kids a life that is categorically worse than the life they ever experienced. They're defeated. There's great distress. There's great just stress and chaos and turmoil that our generation is leaving with the ones that are coming after us. There's idol worship. There's defeat. There's distress. And it's a warning, but I'm telling you today that this ain't happening with me. This is not happening with my family. This is not happening with my church. This is not happening with my community. And let me say, if you are with me, put your hands together. There we go. It's not happening on my watch. It's a warning. If we don't successfully pass the baton, that's what happens. And I'm telling you, I'm not going to let it happen. So, let's end on a positive note. Because Abraham, and many others, but Abraham passed the baton of faith on so successfully. It was awesome. It's really cool to see that. And so in the book of Genesis, we see Abraham. And Abraham lived 175 years, and he died at a ripe old age. 175 is definitely ripe. Having lived a long and satisfying life, he breathed his last and joined his ancestors in death. And so his son of the promise, Isaac, pleaded with the Lord, this is just one example, on behalf of his wife because she was unable to have children. And the Lord answered Isaac's prayer, and Rebekah became pregnant with twins. Isaac was facing a difficulty in his life, and instead of turning to the idols, instead of just being defeated, instead of being distressed, he turned to the Lord. Abraham successfully passed the faith on to his son. And then Isaac's son, Jacob, and just another example, Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place." And I wasn't even aware of it. But he was also afraid and said, "What an awesome place this is. Is it none other than the house of God, the very gateway to heaven?" Jacob is so in tune with what God is doing in his life. And he didn't get that directly from Abraham. He got that from Isaac, his dad. It passed on through this family, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so, when God shows up to Moses, we're kind of making a big circle here. When God shows up to Moses in the burning bush, and God calls Moses and said, you're going to be my people, you're going to be my person to let my people go out of Egypt. Moses said, okay, a bush is speaking to me right now. It's kind of weird. What's your name? What's your name? And the God who's speaking through the burning bush says, my name is Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of who? Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He sent me to you. Say that again. He's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. One more time. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He says, that's my eternal name. My name to be remembered through all generations. That, my friends, is intentional discipleship. That's next generational ministry. And we need to be a part of that. Like, we got to show up for our kids' ministry on Sundays to pass the baton of faith to them. We got to be involved in small groups where relationships can be made so you can pass your faith on to the next person in that small environment. We have to, and we must. Would you stand on your feet with me for prayer? As you're standing up, I just want to encourage you, if you have children in the room with you, maybe you want to go up to them and put your arms on them or hold them or pray for them, pray over them in a moment. If that's not your situation at the moment, maybe you've got a discipleship relationship that's sort of like a father-son relationship, a passing the baton of faith on to the next person. Maybe you want to go stand by them for a moment and pray for them. Or maybe you've got kids of your own, they're in a different room, they're in a different part of the world, they're in a different country, continent. Maybe you can just hold something or just think of them in this moment as you're praying for them, as you're thinking about them. That friend that you've been trying to minister to, that you've been praying for, that coworker that you've been trying to reach out to that's been going through a really hard time. And just think about them. Because God's calling you to pass your faith onto them, to invest in them. You must. We must. And if we don't, I don't like that. We have to. We have to. We're not done until we've passed the baton successfully. So let's just take a moment to just pray, just in the quietness of your heart or out loud if someone there is with you. And as you're doing that, I got one more invitation to you. If you feel like this message was for you, that God was saying, hey, that's me. I need to be more intentional with passing my faith on to somebody else and not just keeping it all for myself. I got 4 batons here, and one of them's for you. And I want you to take this home as a reminder that God's calling me to be intentional about passing my faith on to my kids, to my friends, to the next people at work, whoever that is at church. But God, I feel like that's me today. So if that's you, just be bold. Say, that's me. I'm one of the 4. Come on. Just come on down here and meet me down here on the side, and we'll praise and close our time together today.